In today's episode, we are going to talk about low-income taxpayer clinics. Now, this episode is primarily to help taxpayers who can't afford representation. Because if you've been listening to the podcast, you know that if you are dealing with an issue with the IRS, you have the right to representation. But what happens when you can't afford representation? Well, the IRS has come up with a solution for our most vulnerable taxpayers, and that solution is the Low-Income Taxpayer Clinic.
Welcome to the Tax Relief with Timalyn Bowens podcast. Are you behind on taxes? Is the IRS threatening you or your business? Are you overwhelmed and confused about how to resolve your tax issues? Let's join Timalyn as she explains your options and how she may be able to help. Timalyn Bowens is America's favorite EA.
Hey, family, welcome to episode 73 of the Tax Relief with Timalyn Bowens podcast. In today's episode, we are going to talk about low-income taxpayer clinics. Now, this episode is primarily to help taxpayers who can't afford representation. Because if you've been listening to the podcast, you know that if you are dealing with an issue with the IRS, you have the right to representation. But what happens when you can't afford representation? Well, the IRS has come up with a solution for our most vulnerable taxpayers, and that solution is the Low-Income Taxpayer Clinic. If you're familiar with VITA, this is very similar, with the exception that these clinics are going to specialize in assisting low-income individuals who have a tax dispute, so they're not preparing tax returns. And they're going to also provide education and outreach to taxpayers who speak English as a second language. Okay, so members of the ESL community. Now, when I say taxpayers that can afford representation, affordability can be subjective. So the IRS has actually created guidelines. And before I get too deep into this, I do want to point out that the low-income taxpayer clinics are independent from the IRS, and they are also independent from Taxpayer Advocate Service, which is TAS. So if you go to a low-income taxpayer clinic, you won't be working with somebody who works for the IRS at the clinic, okay? Instead, you will likely be working with attorneys, sometimes CPAs. Law students are able to assist you because they are an exception to an uncredentialed professional who can have power of attorney with Form 2848 to talk to the IRS about your case. Okay? So, with that being said, they're representing taxpayers whose income is below a certain level. All right. Now, just like with tax representation, when you hire somebody, a low-income taxpayer clinic can represent you in an audit. They can represent you in an appeal and tax collection disputes before the IRS. And because these clinics have attorneys working in them, they can also represent you in tax court if your case were to go that far. Okay? They can also help you respond to notices and correct different account problems because, as I often say, the IRS is comprised of human beings. So sometimes it's just a simple mistake, but you need somebody on your side to advocate for you, to help you communicate with the IRS what the issue is and to get it corrected. Now, services are most often offered for free or at the most a small fee. So, clinics that participate in the program are supposed to ensure the fairness and integrity of the tax system for taxpayers who are low income, or as I said before, are members of the ESL community. That is why it's so important to have these manned by volunteers to do this work, because everybody deserves the right to representation when it comes to your taxes. That's why these clinics focus on providing pro bono representation on behalf of the individuals for tax disputes. They also identify and advocate for issues that are going to impact these taxpayers, because a lot of people get into these situations because you don't know what you don't know. But once you know better, if you can't afford to do better, that's where the Low Income Taxpayer Clinic comes in to advocate on your behalf so the IRS doesn't put you out of a house and home, right? If you've listened to previous episodes, you know that there are four different options for negotiating this debt. It could be a payment arrangement. It could be currently not collectible status. It could be an offer in compromise, or it could potentially be bankruptcy. Okay. But working with a qualified tax professional to review your situation will help you know which path is best for you. All right. And while you're there, as a form of preventative care, they will also educate you about the rights that you have as a taxpayer. But then on the flip side of that, also letting you know about your responsibilities as well. Now, let's take a look at the income guidelines, right? I was recently doing some research on what qualifies as middle class and the poverty line, and I was surprised at what the numbers are. So, although you may feel quote unquote broke, you may not qualify to receive help from this program. So, let's look at what those qualifications are. First, the IRS debt is usually less than $50,000 if you're receiving help from one of these programs. Okay. And keep in mind, even though the Low Income Taxpayer Clinic receives partial funding from the IRS, the employees and the volunteers are independent of the IRS, okay? I just want to keep reiterating that, because I don't want you to think that if you get to work with a low income taxpayer clinic, you can go right in and you can get help immediately and the problem solved that day. No, you are going to find an advocate that can help you with your case and help you communicate with the IRS or do the communication for you. Okay? So, when we're looking at the income guidelines, because you want to know if this is going to be an option for you, for this calendar year, 2025, the income ceiling was 250% of poverty guidelines. Okay. So, what that would look like for somebody who's in the 48 contiguous states and DC, if they had a family size of three, so that's three people filed on the tax return where the debt has accrued, the ceiling to qualify for help from the Low Income Taxpayer Clinic was $66,625. Now, if you're a single individual and you live within the area, you're looking at $39,125. Okay. So if you make above the ceiling that I'm mentioning, that means that you were not going to qualify to get the pro bono or small fee help at the low income taxpayer clinic. Okay. Now, if you heard those numbers and you want to check it out, I will put a link in the show notes that will take you to the income ceiling numbers for this calendar year. Just keep in mind that we're about to go into 2026, so they might change slightly. And I will say the numbers go up quite a bit. Well, not too much, but the numbers do go up if you are listening and you're in Alaska or you're in Hawaii. Okay. So if you're listening to that and you say, hey, I think I'm going to qualify, how do I find one of these clinics? If you're in Louisville, Kentucky, where I am, there is actually a legal aid office downtown on Muhammad Ali. But if you're not in Kentucky, that's okay. You can Google or check out the show notes for publication 4134 Low Income Taxpayer Clinic list. This PDF will help you to locate the closest clinic to you. And for those of you that may be listening and maybe English isn't your first language, maybe you speak Spanish, there also is a version of publication 4134 that is in Spanish as well. Okay, so remember, I just want to make sure that you get the help that you need, even if it's not with me. But I know some of you listening may be thinking, oh my goodness, I make more than that, but we're still barely making ends meet. What do I do? Listen, again, it doesn't have to be me, but I still want to make sure you get the help you need. I still want to invite you to book a call with me because check this out. I'll be honest with you and upfront if it's not going to be cost efficient for you to hire me to help you with the issue. However, I do have the option for you to book a paid consultation where I'll walk you through the steps of what needs to be done so that you can get the IRS issue resolved as soon as possible. So, just because you don't qualify for the low income taxpayer clinic, maybe you can still get your account into currently not collectible status, and maybe you can't afford to have me do it for you, but you can afford to pay me to teach you how to have that conversation with the IRS and fill out the paperwork so you can still get your situation taken care of. Okay? So, if that is you, you can book that call with me at www.bowenstaxsolutions.com. Now, I hope you found this to be insightful, hopefully helpful if you were in a situation where you can't afford representation, but you desperately need it. I would urge you to please go check out publication 4134, the Low Income Taxpayer Clinic list, as soon as possible so you can get an appointment and get the help you need. Now, before you go, I'm going to ask you for a favor. Would you not only like this episode, but subscribe to the podcast as well? Because the more people that have subscribed, the more these podcast platforms are going to push this to other taxpayers, and there are taxpayers all over the country that need information just like this, who think there's not any hope for them to get their tax situation handled. But there is hope today, and I want to make sure they get the help they need. And by sharing it with them, just a simple like, just a simple follow, subscription, you're helping me on my personal mission to fill the tax literacy gap one taxpayer at a time. And that also helps because back taxes shouldn't ruin anyone's life. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to listen today. I'd like to thank Jim Ray Consulting Services for helping me get this message out to you. I hope you found the information helpful. Did you know 1 in 50 people have a tax problem? Please share this episode with your friends and family because you never know who may need help. Again, thanks for listening. Hey, just as a reminder, this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. It provides a framework and possible solutions for solving your tax problems, but it is not legally binding. Please consult your tax professional regarding your specific tax situation.